You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group, together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas.
Welcome back to Mind Over Murder. In this bonus episode, we go back to May 2020 for coverage of the Phoenix Canal Killer case. The now identified suspect, Brian Patrick Miller, was ruled competent to stand trial in January 2022, and his long-delayed trial is expected later on this year. We'll certainly keep you posted as things develop in the Phoenix Canal Killer case. We hope you enjoy this bonus episode of Mind Over Murder. We think this technique of investigative genetic genealogy or forensic genealogy, implemented here by our friend Colleen Fitzpatrick, helping law enforcement identify Miller as a suspect, could also be used in other cases like the Colonial Parkway murders and perhaps in the Shenandoah murders in Virginia, among hundreds of other cases. We're optimistic that this technology and these new techniques will be used to solve many cases in the future.
And we're back with part 2 of our episode about Brian Patrick Miller, the alleged canal killer, or zombie hunter, however you'd like to call him, from Phoenix, Arizona.
When we last left off, you were telling us about Miller and his background. So let's continue.
Well, we had left off talking a little bit about his interests in fantasy and steampunk and cosplay. I want to make sure that we get into his background beyond just that. You know, in addition to his time that he spent in Phoenix, Brian Patrick Miller did leave Phoenix after the 1992 and 1993 murders, which he currently stands accused of. And he moved to Everett, Washington. I think it's really important to talk about one of the things that happened to him there, because it will come into play again a little bit later. We don't have a ton of information about his time in Washington. And there was some time in there when he lived in Hawaii as well. And we don't have a lot of information on that. Again, this is all things that I'm assuming are probably going to come out at trial. So our information is a little sketchy in some places. But I do want to mention the fact that in 2002, when Brian Patrick Miller was living in Everett, Washington, he was acquitted in a court of law of stabbing a woman from his office in the back with a 12-inch serrated knife. How was he acquitted, you may ask? He claimed self-defense. He stated that the woman had allegedly tried to rob him. Not entirely clear on all the details here.
And he was acquitted, so there will not be that much information except what public records show.
This theme that's going to continue to appear throughout these cases of stabbing. This is a very clear example of somebody who seems to know his way around a knife. I think we'll just leave it at that.
And has a problem with women, without question.
Definitely. So he left Washington after being acquitted of that charge. And I mean, I don't blame him. And he returned to Phoenix.
But he was up there in the Everett, Washington area for, looks like, close to a decade, from 1993 to around 2003.
There may have been some stops bouncing back and forth between Hawaii and Washington. But again, we really don't know a whole lot about where he had been spending his time. We do know that the Phoenix police have said that they are looking into unsolved cases in Hawaii and Washington that they feel might fit the bill in terms of Brian Patrick Miller's possible involvement.
Right. And the only murders that he's actually been charged in are those 2 cases that we're discussing where there is a DNA link, where his DNA is found in evidence at those 2 crime scenes.
Right. But there are several other cases in Phoenix that police are looking into in terms of his involvement, and we'll talk about those in a minute. So Miller did return to Phoenix in 2002 or 2003 after being acquitted of that stabbing in Washington. We know his wife, Amy, filed for divorce from him in 2006. And in 2008, we know that he gained custody of his daughter, Sarah. He claimed that she was suffering from health issues as a result of living with her mother, whom he claimed was both homeless and unemployed. We do not know if that is more than just a claim, but he was able to gain custody of his teenage daughter. So we don't know a whole lot about what was going on in his life from 2008 to 2015 when he was arrested, but those are really, we're going to call that the highlight reel.
As it were.
As it were, yeah.
And
in the life of Brian Patrick Miller.
As you point out, some of these things would likely come out at trial in terms of exploring different aspects of his life in Everett, Washington, his stint in Hawaii, et cetera.
Exactly. And we will do a source list at the end of this for anyone who is interested in learning more about Brian Patrick Miller. But there actually has not been a lot written about his life in between leaving Phoenix and coming back to it.
Some excellent newspaper reporting on the case, but mostly focused on the Arizona part of his life.
As we had said before, there are other unsolved cases in Phoenix and in the surrounding areas that Phoenix police are looking into because they found it highly unlikely, and I think any of our profiler friends could bear this out. It is highly unlikely that he only had two victims, that he started with Angela Brasso and finished with Melanie Bernas. It just seems very unlikely.
Yeah, especially in a 1-year period, given this guy's long history all the way back to when he was 16 years old of attacking women with knives.
Now, interestingly enough, Miller's ex-wife, Amy, did claim very strongly that there were more victims, that there were more women that Miller had victimized. She very specifically said that he confessed to murdering a young girl who lived in his neighborhood in 1992.
This would have been in Phoenix before he left the first time.
Yes. And if it is true that he is involved in this case that I'm about to tell you about, then this young woman, she's a girl actually, she's not a young woman, she's 13 years old, would actually have been his first victim. So let's go ahead and dig into her a little bit. Phoenix police very strongly feel, and in fact have tried to charge Miller with the murder of 13-year-old Brandy Myers. She was murdered on May 26th, 1992. She was walking around her neighborhood, the neighborhood that Brian Patrick Miller also lived in. In fact, he lived only 3 blocks from their house. Brandy had been knocking on doors to raise money for a fundraiser for her school's book club. And she vanished as if into thin air. She was doing this walking and knocking by herself. Her sister, Kristin, was supposed to have gone with her, but she did not. So it was just Brandy by herself. The Phoenix police have reason to believe that Brian Patrick Miller's door was probably the last one that Brandy knocked on because she did disappear. There was a massive search. When I say massive, I'm not exaggerating here. Looking for this young girl who had just seemingly disappeared. Brandy Myers' body has never been recovered. If you listen to Brian Patrick Miller and his wife, Amy, we actually have a pretty good idea of what happened to her. Miller confessed to his wife, Amy, that when Brandy knocked on his door, he grabbed her, he dragged her into the house. He wouldn't say what he did with her or to her. I really kind of shudder to think about that. But he stated that he put her in the bathtub, presumably when she was already dead, and was going to run cold water over her. He stated that he ran hot water instead, and he was afraid that would speed up decomp. I don't think he quite knows how decomp works. And so instead, he dismembered her, he placed her in trash bags, and he stored her in a large trash can in his house until trash day. And it just makes me shudder. It's awful.
The whole thing is just so horrible.
Just awful. He did confess to his wife that the neighbors complained about what they called an unusually bad smell from the trash can. And Miller told the neighbors that there was rotten meat in the trash can.
It's awful. It's just so horrible.
Awful. Now, according to Amy Miller, She thought her husband was joking when he confessed this murder to her. So she did not believe him. But I guess once he was arrested, it did occur to her that possibly he had not been lying about this. He had not been joking. He was telling the truth.
Now, Phoenix police actually attempted to file a first-degree murder charge against Miller because they strongly believed that his door was the last one that she knocked on, as you mentioned. This despite the lack of a body. Apparently, the county prosecutor felt he could not prosecute the case because there was no likelihood of conviction. And it's funny, this is something I think we're going to be exploring here on Mind Over Murder in the coming months. What a family member might be looking for, which is answers, what happened to my loved one, could be very different from an investigator, which is, can I clear this case, which is, can I move this from an unsolved to a solved case? And then there's the perspective of the prosecutor, and all of these things are very important. The prosecutor, he or she is thinking, can I get a guilty verdict here? So the goal, if you will, of these various participants, and we can keep going down the line here of people who are active participants in this process, which starts out with a tragic loss and then an investigation and a prosecution and then perhaps an appeal. And, you can see the steps going along, but what's important to each one of these individuals can end up being very distinctly different. And I was very struck by the fact that the county attorney didn't feel that they could prosecute the case because there was no likelihood of conviction. Remember, this young girl, Brandy Myers' body has disappeared. It's still never been found. So in terms of physical evidence that might tie a perpetrator into this crime and so on and leading to a guilty verdict, those things are in very short supply in this example.
And I would imagine that unless he actually outright confesses to it in a court of law or to an investigator, we're never really with 100% certainty going to know what happened to poor Brandy Myers.
Sure. And this alleged confession to his ex-wife is just that. It's just him telling her a story. There's no legal standing there. I'm not sure that his ex-wife, Amy, could be obligated to testify against him. And I know there are laws about preventing a spouse from testifying against his or her spouse or ex-spouse. I'm not sure what the law might be in Arizona. As you said, failing physical evidence or some other way to charge a perpetrator with Brandy Myers' murder, what we have technically is a missing persons case.
It's just so tragic. Any missing persons case is tragic. We know this. But if you Google a picture of Brandy Myers, it's so sad because she's such a fragile looking little girl. She's got this enormous pair of glasses that practically eat up her face.
Right.
And she just looks so sweet. And you just can't imagine who would do such an awful thing to this girl. And
her sister described her as being extremely trusting, and also she used the expression diminished mental capacity, although, she was fine to be walking around the neighborhood and raising funds for her book club. But she's a little kid, basically, and she seems to have fallen into the hands of a predator.
So if he is indeed responsible for Brandy Myers, then she would technically be his first victim because the later murders of Angela Brasso and Amelia Bernas come a little bit later.
Right.
Phoenix police are also curious as to whether or not he may have had any involvement with another missing young lady. She was found exactly one day later from Brandy Myers' disappearance, and that was May 27th, 1992. This is one of those cases I feel so badly for this poor girl. Because nothing, it sounds like nothing good came of her life at all. She apparently had a really, really rough time of it. Her name was Shannon Amok, 16 years old. She had run away from her group foster home, which was located in Brandy and Miller's North Phoenix neighborhood.
Here we go again.
Yeah, so again, we do have that connection, that sort of geographic connection here. Her dead body was found on May 27th, 1992. She was found in a trash pile off of 26th Street and Deer Valley Road by someone who was ATVing in the area. She had been strangled, so this is minus, if this is him, this is minus the stabbing that he seems to be so fond of. What really kind of broke my heart on this is that she was never reported missing.
Yeah, this is such a sad case.
I would hope that everybody would be missed by someone. And she was never reported missing from her group home. And that is largely because she was classified as a chronic runaway. Between 1989 and 1991, she had run away more than 40 times.
It's just awful. This poor kid. One of the articles I read was describing her as, she ended up being almost like a street kid, and this group of runaways that were almost discarded by society. She herself is born to her mother was a 16-year-old sexual assault victim. You just feel like Shannon's got all of these strikes against her, one after another.
And I was shocked to read that her adoptive parents just turned her over to CPS. They just said, she's out of control, just take her.
Child Protective Services.
Yeah, I could not believe, I guess maybe I've lived a little bit of a sheltered life. I didn't know that that was something that a parent could do, that you could turn your kid over to CPS.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
This is such a tragedy.
It really was. Shannon because she was never reported missing, she went in to the system as a Jane Doe. And so she was buried in Twin Buttes Cemetery in Tempe, in essentially, a pauper's grave, a Jane Doe. So in order to actually ID her, the detective who was on her case found Shannon's birth mother, who was still living in Phoenix. They went to her and asked, can we have a DNA sample to see if we can ID her? We'd like to at least, we'd like to give her a name. They examined more than 1,600 reports of runaways between 1991 and 1994 because they wanted to ID that poor little Jane Doe who was buried in Tempe. And they finally did, using that DNA. They finally ID'd her and they exhumed her and they laid her to rest under, a proper name and a proper burial. But her murder case is still considered open and active. And because of her proximity to, Miller's home, that is one of the cases that Phoenix PD is looking into with possible involvement with Brian Patrick Miller.
Right. But lacking forensics to tie him into this case and the previous case that we just discussed, it would be very difficult. And I know how upsetting this can be for family members who want answers in their loved one's case. Unless you've got some ability to actually tie in a suspect into the murder of your loved one, it's going to be very, very difficult.
That is two probable cases from 1992 that he might be involved in. Then we've got the murder of Angela Brasso, the one the next year of Melanie Bernas. And then, he left Phoenix, but he did move to Everett, Washington. And there is a very peculiar case in Everett, Washington from 2000 that Phoenix police eventually decided to take a close, hard look at to see if possibly Brian Patrick Miller was involved in this one. And this creeps me out too. This really, really is upsetting to me.
Well, as you walk us through the details, I think all of us will understand exactly what you're talking about in this case of Victoria, I guess we're going to say it Mickelson. Mickelson,
yeah. And again, if we're butchering the pronunciations on any of these, of course, that is our fault, and we do apologize for that. Okay, Victoria Mickelson, 14. This took place in 2000 in Everett, Washington. So Victoria Mickelson was walking to her bus stop. She decided that because people had been bullying her at her regular bus stop, she was going to walk over to the one where her best friend lived. And that happened to be a 40-minute walk through the woods. Now that's dedication, to decide to walk 40 minutes so that you can get away from the people who've been bullying you. So she decided to take a walk through the woods to get to another bus stop so that she wouldn't have to deal with the people who were bothering her on her route. She was about 15 minutes into that walk, and she was walking what is called the Interurban Trail. That was a bike path. Here we go again. Mm-hmm. With a greenway on one side and then private property, presumably private homes on the other.
Boy, this is starting to sound familiar, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. So she's walking through the woods, and she spotted a man walking through the trees, whom she described as creepy. She described him as having ripped jeans. She said he looked filthy, like he'd been sleeping in the dirt. I would find it creepy too if he began to trail me through the woods as he began to trail her through the woods.
And keep in mind, our suspect is often described as borderline homeless. And this guy definitely fits that description. You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder.
Our creepy man trails her through the woods, and she starts walking faster. So did he. She turns around. He's still there. She turned around, I think, like 10 different times to see, is he still there? Yes, he was, every time. And the last time that she turned around, she didn't see him, turned back around, there he is, caught up to her. He wrapped an arm around her neck and began stabbing her repeatedly in the neck and in the stomach.
Wow.
Yeah, this is a nightmare. This is an absolute nightmare. She is tough. I will give her that. My goodness. 14 years old, you're being stabbed in the neck and in the stomach, and she kicked the knife right out of his hand.
Pretty impressive, actually.
Yeah, she didn't try to run. She was just acting on adrenaline. She actually turned around. She faced him. She kicked the knife out of his hand, and she fought him for it. She fought him for that knife, and she finally got it, and she grabbed it. And, she did the thing where she just rolled up into a ball so that he couldn't get it from her.
Right.
And apparently he seemed not to have any idea what to do at that point, because he finally just said, okay, I will stop hurting you, but you got to give me back the knife. And because she's panicked and because she's injured and because she wants to get to her best friend and probably because she wants this whole thing to be over, she gave him back the knife. In return, he stabbed her twice in the back. He strangled her into unconsciousness. And then I don't know what this is all about, but this is actually the part that scared me the most. He put her backpack under her head like a pillow, and he left her in the woods to die.
Yeah, he left her there to bleed out.
So Victoria Mickelson survived. She was stabbed 17 times, and she survived.
And my understanding from reading about this attack, she required extensive surgery. She had to have more than a foot of her lower intestine removed. Oh, God, yeah. I mean, just horrible injuries. It's amazing that she survived. Of course, we wouldn't know this story if it weren't for her fighting back. And Victoria is 14 years old and fighting off a grown man.
I mean, good for her. You want to talk badass. This is it.
Yeah, really.
So she did actually provide a sketch artist with details. And in return, she was presented with books of assailant photos, but she was never actually able to ID her attacker. During the summer of 2015, when Phoenix PD is continuing to look at cases in and around the areas where Brian Patrick Miller may have lived, they came across Victoria's ordeal and thought, well, isn't this interesting? And so someone from Phoenix PD arrived at her door with a picture of Brian Patrick Miller and said, is this the guy who attacked you? And she was like, yeah, I'm like 95.5% sure.
I love the percentage.
He's the guy who attacked me. I know. I love that she put like half a
95.5%. I love her precision. Now, keep in mind, this is 15 years later. Mm-hmm. She's attacked in 2000, and the Phoenix police came to visit with Victoria Mickelson in 2015. So she's having to go back to her memory as a 14-year-old girl. She's now about a 29-year-old woman and being asked about something that happened 15 years prior.
She was pretty sure, and she did agree to appear as a witness at his trial if she was needed. Now, the part that really ticks me off is the statute of limitations was up on her attack. So he can't be prosecuted for that.
Which just seems so bizarre to me, too. This is attempted murder at minimum. He stabbed her 17 times and left her for dead. I'm not saying this is Miller necessarily, but whoever attempted to assault Victoria Mickelson clearly intended to kill her. I can't believe that the statute of limitations is up on attempted murder.
I know that really frosted my cookies.
Yeah.
But, she has agreed that if it comes up, that she will go to Phoenix and testify, which, I mean, you want to talk again, continued bravery and badassery. This is it.
I know. I really, really like this woman. I think she's amazing. And not taking anything away from any of our victims here, but it's amazing that she survived this attack.
So, if for those of you keeping track, we've had 2 potential victims in 1992, 1 potential victim in 2000, and then we have our final potential victim in 2013. This is a 19-year-old woman by the name of Adrienne Salinas, and she disappeared in between her apartment in Tempe, which is home to Arizona State University. Go Sun Devils! That's where I did my graduate work. I can say it.
All right. Well, there you have it. The Sun Devils. Wow.
Yep. ASU Sun Devils.
This and the way you say it, makes Sun Devil sound like one word, not two.
Well,
what does a Sun Devil look like? Are they a devil?
It's a little dude with a yellow face and a red jumpsuit, and he carries a pitchfork.
Is there cosplay involved?
You know what? No, ASU is great. ASU is where I did my grad work, so go Sun Devils.
No, I think it's all good. I really do. Yeah. By the way, for the record, we made it through that earlier discussion of cosplay, and during our prep session, I believe I used the expression dweeb.
Don't say it. You're going to be insulting anyone who listens to this who does cosplay.
Okay.
And there are more people who cosplay than you think.
Is dork more acceptable?
Nope.
Dweeb?
Nope.
Dork?
Nope.
Nerd?
Nope. Hey, I'm a nerd, dude, and still, no.
Yeah.
Nope.
Well, you're kind of a nerd and proud of it.
I mean, yeah, I'm a nerd and proud of it, but let's just say it took me a lot of therapy to become proud of it.
You've embraced your inner nerdness. Yeah, but I think you're pretty hip, So, I don't know. Writer.
My students would all argue with you, but that's okay.
Well, they have one view of you. Those of us that talk with you here on Mind Over Murder, we get to, probe a bit more nuanced version. Okay, so go Sun Devils.
All right, so go Sun Devils.
Wait a minute, how did you say it? Go Sun Devils!
Something go Sun Devils! Yeah, I'm just being ridiculous.
All right. No, it's all good. All right, so that we were shout out for Tempe, which is a nice town.
Yes.
Am I saying that right?
You are saying it Tempe, yes, okay. Exactly.
All right.
You can always tell who's from Arizona or lived in it and who can't or hasn't by the way that they pronounce Tempe and Prescott.
Tempe?
People say it Prescott, but it's Prescott.
Well, it's funny. Being from Massachusetts and all, never mind. People can't get past Worcester and Gloucester and Peabody and all these really great old New England names. And, of course, as soon as somebody mispronounces any one of them, they're not from around here.
You're not from here. Yeah, exactly.
Right. They wouldn't know their way to a Dunkin' Donuts if it saved their lives.
Now, Adrienne was apparently a transplant, or at least she was living on her own for the first time in Tempe. She was not attending ASU, but she was attending a community college. She was described as very soft-spoken and kind. She had a sweet smile. She was living with 2 roommates at the time and attending community college. She had been unable to work shortly before her disappearance because she was suffering from valley fever. And if you're not familiar with valley fever, I don't recommend you become familiar with it. It's not a great thing.
What is it?
It's a valley fever, and it sometimes happens to people who move to the Phoenix area. And it's a fungal. It's a fungal infection that you can get infections in your lungs. It's kind of gross and not great. And it sounds like she had a pretty bad case of it because she had to undergo lung surgery as a treatment.
Right.
So she had not been working, but I'm assuming she was on the mend. She was last seen attending a party on the night of June 15th, 2013. She went to the party with some friends and then left the party and was seen driving erratically. This was seen on a traffic cam on her way back to her apartment. Someone called in the fact that she was driving erratically, and a 911 dispatcher took a report that her car was on First Street. It hit a curb. It had 2 flat tires. And so presumably she abandoned the car and she began to walk back to her apartment. The last communication that they have of any variety from Adrian was a text that she sent to her boyfriend at 4:43, telling him that she was on her way to his apartment to see him. 10 minutes later, she called for a cab, I'm guessing to get to her boyfriend's.
Mm-hmm.
And at 5:07, her phone was either shut off or it went dead. We don't know which. And she was never seen or heard from after that.
And she's 19 years old at the time of this incident.
Yeah, 19 years old. So that took place on June 15th. She was found on August 6th in a wash near Apache Junction, which is about 30 miles from where she had last been seen. Her body was mummified, so her ID had been confirmed using DNA. The medical examiner has been, I'm not going to say cagey, that's not necessarily right, but the medical examiner didn't mention whether her head or her hands were present. But many locals who were, familiar with the Canal Killer case have wondered whether or not she may have been decapitated, like Angela Brasso, and whether or not this may be connected to the Canal Killer. And the reason that people have wondered whether or not this is connected to the Canal Killer is largely because of the location where she was found. She was found near Apache Junction, which is near the Superstition Mountains.
Mm-hmm.
And she was found in an area that Brian Patrick Miller was known to frequent to role play with his friends. And in fact, Brian Patrick Miller's friend by the name of Keen Azaria, sorry if I'm butchering that, he actually called police and said, hey, you guys may want to look at my friend, Brian Patrick Miller, for this disappearance of this young lady.
Yeah,
we don't know what prompted that call.
This is the thing that made me put the big asterisk in the column next to that note, because here we go again. His friend is highlighting the fact that they should be looking at this guy for this disappearance and murder.
Yeah, he called again. Again, we don't know the reason why he called, but something must have run up a red flag for him, because he called and said, you should look at my friend. He and I were both attending a party within 1 mile of Adrian's location on the night that she was murdered.
Mm-hmm. And remember, she's wandering home, trying to find her way home. And it's funny. She had been at a party. She clipped a curb, blew 2 tires. She might have been driving while impaired, and she needed a ride. She might not have might not have been thinking very clearly about accepting a ride.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of possibilities here.
Again, we have the 2 pieces of circumstantial evidence that show he might be involved. He was very near to her on the night of her disappearance, and her body did show up in an area that he was known to frequent. So as a result of those 2 pieces of circumstantial evidence, the Tempe police have said, we think we'd like to have a conversation with this guy about her murder.
That's a direct quote.
Yes.
They would, quote, like to have a conversation with Miller, unquote, regarding the case.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I put a big star next to that in your notes. Very, very striking.
That brings us to, this point. The current legal proceedings stand thus. Brian Patrick Miller is charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder for Angela Brasso and Melanie Bernas. 2 counts of kidnapping, 1 count of sexual assault, 1 count of attempted sexual assault. And again, we don't know which woman he succeeded with and when he only attempted with. We have no idea. We don't have the full details on that, but those are the counts. And those are only for Brasso and Bernas. Those are not for any of the other victims that we have laid out, or potential victims, I should say. The prosecution is seeking the death penalty in this case,
which is a possibility in Arizona.
Again, we don't know a whole lot about why this trial has been delayed. We have 2 solid pieces of information. We do know that Miller's lead attorney resigned in 2016.
Never a good sign when your attorney quits.
No, not at all. We know that at some point during that year, he was found unconscious in his jail cell. And there was video of that incident, whatever that incident was. And that led to more delays in the trial. My not at all professional, but guess is that possibly someone ordered a psych eval. That's going to be my guess.
Yeah, it sounds pretty fair.
Yeah. Other than that, we don't really know why the delay. The most recent date that I was able to find for when this is set to come to trial is June 2020. But again, because of the coronavirus, who knows?
We shall see.
Yeah. So, overall, this guy is not a nice dude.
No, not at all. But it's funny. Part of me, while reading this, as we prepared, was thinking, oh, please, keep this guy alive, because I really want this man to face trial for this and any other cases that he's involved in. Now, some of these cases may be difficult to connect him to, and I'm hoping that police in Washington State and Hawaii, as well as Arizona, are continuing to probe this guy's background to see if there are other cases that he may be involved in, because it's quite a long list.
It really is, yeah. And it's, I put together a timeline. And if you look at the amount of, if you really look at the amount of time that all of this took place over, this is, if he is responsible for all of these victims, and again, we're not saying that he is, but if he is responsible for them, this guy has had a long career.
Yeah, let's go back over the timeline.
All right. So, and again, this is all with the assumption we know for sure that in 1990, at the age of 16, he stabbed a woman near the Paradise Valley Mall, and he served juvenile corrections for 2 years.
This is in Arizona.
In Arizona, yes. If he is responsible for Brandy Myers, that happened on May 26th, 1992. If he is responsible for Shannon Almack, that took place on May 27th, 1992. Or again, that's when her body was found. And May 26th is when Brandy disappeared. Angela Brasso was murdered November of 1992.
And we do appear to have DNA evidence linking him to that case.
Yes. So that is the one he's awaiting trial for. Melanie Bernas, September 1993. Again, we do have DNA, so he is awaiting trial for this. He moved to Everett, Washington in 1994. Presumably, he either kept his nose clean or there are other victims that we do not know of yet.
I doubt it.
In 2000, there was the stabbing of Victoria Mickelson in Everett, Washington.
She's the young lady who survived and is 95.5% certain he's the man that attacked her.
In 2002, there was the workplace stabbing of one of his office mates, also in Everett, Washington, which he was acquitted of. In 2002 or 2003, he moved back to Phoenix, and he presumably kept his nose clean for a little bit.
I doubt it.
Again, yeah, we haven't found any more. There are no more presumed victims from that time, but again, we'll see. June 2013, if he's responsible for Adrienne Salinas, that's when she disappeared. And in January 2015, he was arrested for Angela Brasso and Melanie Bernas's murders.
It's quite a track record. And I think
it really is.
I think there are maybe holes in his history that could lead to additional interesting places.
Yeah, no, I think so. And it's interesting. We had someone comment on the Colonial Parkway Murders page the other day that serial killers don't just stop. And we know that that's a misnomer, because they can and they do. And so it could very well be that maybe there are long gaps in between Phoenix and Washington, and in between Washington and moving back to Phoenix. Maybe he was able to keep his nose clean. Like you, I kind of doubt it. This is a guy who seems to have a lot of rage toward women.
Well, from our conversations with current and former FBI agents and profilers, and they're the folks under the auspices of Robert Ressler and John Douglas and other leading profilers, they originally thought that serial killers kept on killing, and that certainly has happened, but they do seem to have modified their thinking that serial killers are like these automatons that just keep killing and killing and can only be stopped by being incarcerated or being put to death or dying in an unrelated incident or what have you. And yet now we're seeing more and more examples of cases where killers have stopped. Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, clearly stopped. The Grim Sleeper case involving Lonnie Franklin and at least a dozen and likely many more female victims in the Los Angeles area. He stopped for years. And as a matter of fact, one of the reasons why they call that case the Grim Sleeper case is because it appeared to the investigators that the case would go to sleep for sometimes years at a time, and then he would start up again. Other examples, Joseph D'Angelo in the Golden State Killer case appears to have stopped and started and modified his techniques based on what was happening even in the investigation. Of course, he had a law enforcement background and so on. So I don't think that all serial killers behave in a linear fashion. I think they can stop and start based on circumstances and even what's going on in their lives, independent of their misdeeds as a killer.
No, I agree. And it is possible that he had other outlets that were allowing him to sort of subsume those violent impulses. We don't know. Again, I'm not a profiler. Bill's not a profiler. We know several of them, but it's not like we've taken lessons or anything like that. I would be surprised if these are the only victims that there are. Like you were saying earlier, I really do hope that Washington and Hawaii continue to look very closely into any unsolved cases that they may have, because those two murders are not his only times at the rodeo, so to speak.
No, that's true. And one of the things our profilers in educating us, and really is fascinating and a real privilege to be able to sit down and talk with these folks after reading their books and listening to their interviews, is to be able to probe some of these things. And one of the expressions that they've used in conversation with us is that in some cases, killers will age out of the profile. In other words, just the passage of time or being in a better place in their lives, they might be able to move out of this category of being a serial killer. And yet there may be other circumstances, and that could easily apply in a case like this. I'm not certain that they're ever going to be able to determine whether a particular individual, whether it's Miller or someone else, necessarily killed Brandy Myers or Shannon Amok. Hope springs eternal that there will be answers for these family members and the investigators and the people that have worked so hard to see answers in this case. At the same time, we know that Miller is currently being charged for the Angela Brasso and Melanie Bernas murders. So it's a start.
It is. It is definitely a start. Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Mind Over Murder.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.